Thank you for downloading Season 6, Episode 1 of Baseball Pitching the Fix, featuring baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. As always, I am your host, Joe Janish, with our expert Angel kicking off a brand new season. This episode, we are going to be starting out talking a little bit about some MLB rules changes. In Angel's teaching moment, which will be coaching the coaches, we will be talking about the defining moment in the pitcher's motion, and then we will be closing out our show with a brand new segment called Pearls. And that will be something that Angel will unwrap, and I'll just leave it at that. And I'll tell you that it's going to be something that you are going to really enjoy, and it'll be something of importance. And let's just get kicked off. First of all, Angel, we didn't have much of a off season. We had about a 3-week off season in between our off season podcast episodes, and now here we are in season 6. How are you feeling about this year?
I am excited, and welcome back to all our listeners. And I can't wait to get this season going. And I can't wait for the first Yankees game.
The judge.
And if you don't know, I'm a Yankees fan. You will know by the end of the season. I'm excited. I don't know. I just can't wait for the season to start. And I guess the games are starting tomorrow. So that's exciting.
Yeah, we are recording this episode at the end of March, right before the Major League Baseball season begins. I know a lot of our listeners have already begun their season, are well underway into their college seasons, and some are in their high school seasons, depending on where they are in the country. And so here we are to start helping you out. And we're going to kick off this first episode with some of the rule changes in MLB. Now, if you've been following Major League Baseball, there's been a lot of news about how to shorten the game or speed up the game. Apparently, the powers that be believe that baseball is taking too long, and they're trying to implement all kinds of rules to shorten the game. We'll see how that works out. Personally, I always thought it was really nice to have a nice slow game, but maybe a 3.5 hour, 4 hour affair is a little too long. So perhaps it is time to make some changes in the rules. Again, there have been a lot of changes made dealing with the amount of time in between innings. One of the most controversial ones is that relief pitchers have to face a minimum of 3 batters. There's a rule about mound visits. There's rules about position players pitching. There was one rule, Angel, that I saw in there that I don't think a lot of people will be thinking too much about or putting a lot of focus on. It is in regard to minor league assignments. Now, a few years ago, they changed rules. When you send down a pitcher, whoever it is, when you send them down to the minor leagues, you can bring them back up in 10 days. And this was kind of to help rosters stay fresh and try to make sure that you had a good full team on board in case you had injuries or whatever. But over the past several years, major league teams were abusing this rule, and they were kind of using it as a way to keep their bullpens fresh and to keep fresh arms in their bullpen. So they would send a pitcher down on, say, April the 2nd, and then they would replace him with a fresh minor league pitcher, and then they would bring the original pitcher back in 10 days. And therefore, you could literally send him back down, 2 or 3 times and bring him back up. You could bring him back up 3 times in a month, theoretically. Well, the rule has been changed. Now a player has to stay down in the minors for 15 days, which pretty much means once you send him down, you won't be able to bring him back up that month. And on the surface, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but what struck me was that now that means major league teams are going to go back to having a bullpen that is more or less intact for, I'm not going to say the entire season, but there's not going to be as much fluidity with fresh arms coming up. So once again, well, let me put it this way. Major league managers have been accustomed to having these fresh arms up from the minor leagues. So as a result, they have been using more relievers. This rule is put in to kind of eliminate that. But I really don't think that major league managers are going to be thinking that way now. They've been managing this way for a few years. They're used to bringing in more relievers. They're used to bringing in 5 or 6 relievers in a game. I think that they are going to put caution to the wind or forget or whatever you want to call it, I don't think they're going to be thinking about the rest and recovery that's needed for a relief pitcher the way they do with the major league pitchers, even the starters. I mean, even though they don't even really understand or respect the starters' rest and recovery. So what I'm thinking is that a lot of these relievers who aren't going to be shuffled back and forth, their arms will not be fresh and they will be seeing larger workloads than they have in the past few years. And I wanted to throw that at you and see what you thought, because, again, rest and recovery is a big part of preventing pitching injuries or causing pitching injuries. So I just wanted to get your take on how you thought pitchers and, even pitching coaches that have to keep an eye on this sort of thing, how should pitchers be managing this, or how should the coaches be managing something like this?
Well, so first, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. When you're saying a relief pitcher, are you talking about a closer, the guy who they count on to put in the ninth inning? Or are you talking about the setup guys that go in sometimes for 1 or 2 innings?
No, it's not the closer. It's going to be anybody, because generally you don't bring the closer up and down. It's usually those guys in the middle who,
right,
can come in the 5th inning, the 4th inning, the 6th inning, that sort of thing.
The middle relief guys.
Right.
And were a lot of teams last year. I mean, I know in the playoffs, there's a team that used nothing but relievers, I think, through the whole game. And I think they had 8 pitchers in there. And I do know that everything about what they're doing now is to make the game shorter. And when a new pitcher goes in, he's got to take his 8 warm-ups. So I get what they're trying to do, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. So were there teams, because I don't remember seeing, I just can't recall it, but I don't watch as many live games maybe as you do. Are there a lot of teams who would run their starter, and then once they started putting in middle relief, they might use 2 or 3 different relief guys before getting to the closer? Is that the common thing? Okay, at least. Okay.
5 or 6.
So well, there was a time when I wasn't as busy where I watched a lot of major league games, and what it sounds like is it's on the increase. That usage is on the increase, because I think before we would see
correct
4, 5, 6 innings, or then we'd see another inning from someone, or maybe 2, and then okay. So here's what I think. I think that, first of all, the middle relief pitchers, now they're doing 2 things to the pitchers. They're going to make sure they have to stay out there for at least three hitters, right?
Right.
And they're not saying 3 outs.
Correct.
They're saying 3 hitters.
Well, it's a minimum of 3 batters unless the inning is ended. So like you could potentially bring in a pitcher with 2 outs left in the inning, and he face only 1 batter. That's okay as long as the inning is over. But you can't bring in a reliever to face 1 guy and that guy gets a hit, and then you take him out and bring in somebody else to face the next pitcher. He has to face at least 3, or the inning has to end.
So they're taking away the capability of special teams on baseball.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And so really and I think they do that not because they're trying to conserve an arm, but because there's a reason why they're bringing him in, because he has a certain talent against a certain type of hitter, or the hitter is a fastball guy or whatever. So, okay. So they've got 2 things they're changing for the pitchers. One is they need to stay in a little longer.
Right.
Or they need to stay in for a certain amount of time. And the other is that they're going to be confined to making sure their middle relief guys are good to go for at least 15 days without having to make that change. 10 to 15 days, I thought they were using it like sending one guy down one day and bringing him back up in that week. 10 days isn't, when you think about that, they don't play usually one day out of the week, but 10 days doesn't sound too much different than 15, but I think what they are saying is that, they're going to have to think things through. In terms of the recovery, here's the thing about middle relief pitchers. So instead of a guy going in for 2 innings, maybe some guy that would, they could put a relief guy in for 1 inning and a different relief guy in for another inning, right?
Right.
Okay. So pitchers that are throwing, and as long as they're good, they're probably not going to, they're working under less recovery anyway. Okay. That's their style.
Right.
That's their style.
Sure.
Because, they shouldn't be in that job unless they can get the job done. I mean, if they're not getting the job done in 12 pitches per inning or 12 to 15, and, when you're doing, let's say it's a 15 pitch inning, So that means that, let's say a reliever's in for 2 innings, that's going to be 30 pitches. Now, innings in a game are more stressful than like bullpen innings, but he conceivably could be ready. Well, he could be ready the next day if absolutely needed, but basically it's a 1-day recovery. Now, you have to remember that over time, this guy's throwing more pitches because he's got his warm-up pitches, et cetera. So I think it will work okay as long as they are actually following recovery guidelines. I think they're going to have to think things through, and they're going to have to make sure that any place where they had some wobble or loose ends with the other system, sending guys down, if that was part of their management style and not part of, okay, we're doing it because we have to, because so-and-so isn't, doing well. If it is part of the management style, then yes, you're absolutely right. And here's the thing that everyone needs to know. Just because the pitcher is a closer, or just because he is a middle relief guy, so he's not throwing a lot of pitches, if he's up and down more than a regular pitcher who's maybe starting and then he's getting 4 days off or 3 days off, if he's up and down a lot, the stress of up and down can be different for each pitcher. So you just have to really monitor it. By the time they get to major league level, but I think it's interesting. And I think that in college, when they have designated pitchers for certain roles, it's so important that you train them according to what they might face if they get drafted. So I think that it's always important to be aware, and each middle relief pitcher should be aware of the own health of his arm. And I think that that's probably going to be something they're just going to pay a little closer attention to, or let's put it this way, they're not going to be able to ignore it if they want to keep the injuries down. Don't most of the injuries occur in starters, Joe?
Well, yeah, they generally do, because
Yeah.
that's, and part of the reason is because the teams have been able to use more relievers, kind of like artificially expanding their roster by having teams 20 years ago, teams would use maybe 15 pitchers for an entire season. Now you see teams using 25, 30, 35 pitchers throughout the course of a season. So they just keep bringing in fresh arms and fresh arms and fresh arms. And I think that managers are used to this now. And I am curious to see how this will work out, where if, you'll see a pitcher throw 3 innings of relief and maybe 50 pitches, 55 pitches, and then bring him back 2 days later to do the same thing, because they won't have the flexibility to bring up a fresh arm like they did in the past.
Yeah, that would be a problem. I do have something to say, though, to these decisions that Major League is making, and about how a lot of this could backfire. So it seems like everything, I've heard two things they want. One is they want the game to be shorter, and the other is they want it to be more interesting. And I think interesting means more hitting, correct? Isn't that always what they're thinking? For us pro pitching people, it's more interesting to me to watch what the pitcher's doing than what the hitter's doing.
Agreed.
But okay, so now here's what's going to happen. And I guess we will know sooner rather than later. Let's just say they continue to create rules that in any way would become difficult for pitchers to adapt to. Now, pitchers on a mental and emotional level are very, very adaptable because they're wired that way. They're just that kind of guy. Not much is going to get them, like if they have a pitch clock or they have this or whatever. So I think, they're going to be adapting. But if they start bringing in too many things at one time, especially with these middle relief guys who are being brought in because it's a sensitive time of the game, if they're starting to run their show in a way where the guys are having fatigue, they're going to give up more hits. More hits means more guys on base. More hits means more hitters coming up in each inning. Voila, we have a longer game.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So I think that what's going to happen is major leagues are touching the surface for trying to come up with some things. And I'm not sure. And I said this on our last show of the last season. I think we're discussing when, we know the Atlantic League moved the mound back to 62 feet I think it was 62 feet. Actually, we didn't know at the time. And I said, I think it'll be 4 feet or 2 feet. I don't think it'll be 10 feet. And I think it was 2 feet. And I think that they're trying to do things to create a certain environment. And I think what's going to happen is, for example, they want to make the game shorter. Well, if in fact, let's say we knew that the 62-foot mound would really be an advantage for hitters, well, you're going to have a longer game because you're going to have more stuff going on the infield, right? More action. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how, by looking only at one piece, how it's going to affect the other pieces. And I think that's going to be interesting to see. But keep me posted on what you see happening with that.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on all these different rule changes and how they're affecting things, because the intention is to affect things. So we'll see how they're affected and how the pitcher might be affected. So thank you for weighing in on that, Angel. So let's move on to our teaching moment, where we will be coaching the coaches, and you have a very interesting thing to talk about today, which is the defining moment in a baseball pitcher's motion.
Yes. So let me tell you the way this came up. And by the way, Joe, is it in the show notes that our listeners can go to see this photo? And also we know that they can go to Angel Borrelli Pitching on YouTube. Are those the two ways they can see this photo that we're going to be talking about?
Yes, exactly. This is one of our episodes where we do have a visual. So for those of you who have your phone handy or are listening on a computer, or however you're listening, please, we'll give you a second to go to the show notes and pull up the picture, or go to Angel Borrelli's YouTube channel to take a look at the picture that we will be talking about right now.
Okay, so let me tell you about this guy. So this is Ben Clegg, who pitches for the Academy of Arts in San Francisco. And he sent me this picture. I haven't seen him now for over a year. He was plagued with injuries and problems, rotator cuff, everything. And he came to me. He, as you see, he's a lefty. He had many reasons I could see why he was having the pain. And this guy was one of the kind of players you want to work with, because he's so committed to everything. And it was not an easy road for him at all. And so I haven't seen him. And that, for me, no news is good news. And I get this photo. He texted to me 3 days ago. In the text, it said, "All our hard work." And what I love about this is, of course, it's why I do what I do, to have somebody feeling success. But the other thing that I really loved, and I'm going to point out some things, this view here and what he's doing here was so perfect for me to teach something so important. And all you coaches, you can go and get this exact view of your guys and stop the camera at this exact place. And I'm going to teach you how to see right here in this moment what's going to happen next. And it's a defining moment, because if he doesn't look similar to this, and I'll give you the ways that things could be wrong, you're going to have problems with the delivery. But here's what I love the most about this. He knew when he saw this that it was right. He knew that it was something that I needed to see, because it's something we talked about. And of course, when you're learning as a pitcher, it's conceptual. You're trying to do it. But the fact that he could take the information I gave him, put him in the driver's seat with him, send him on his way to college, have him know exactly what he needed to work on. And then here, I haven't seen him in over a year. He sends this to me saying, "Look, Angel, I finally did it. I finally have the correct shoulder mechanics right now at this phase." For me to know that the knowledge was in his brain and in his body to where he could recognize this is, to me, the most successful story that I could have. Because if you're an instructor, you just tell people to do things. Put your arm here, put your foot there. The purpose of this show for all you coaches and for your pitchers is I want you to understand concepts. So you're always in the driver's seat, so you have a chance to work and improve as you go on. This guy 4 years ago had so much pain that he is even can be this happy to send me a photo. Is so exciting. He never gave up. And if you have something to work towards, so efficient mechanics makes sense. So that's what's so great about getting this picture. And I thank you, Ben, so much for sending it to me. So guys, here's what I want you to look at in this photo. So first of all, he is just finishing up the rotation segment of the phase of the motion. So as you know, once his front foot lands, he starts to turn. And the pitcher turns at 3 levels. He turns his hips or his pelvis. And his pelvis, if you look at Ben and if you picture him with jeans on, both pockets in the front are laying across the front of his pelvis. His belt is at the top of his pelvis. Right above the belt is his lower trunk muscles, and right underneath the where you see the school name, those are his upper trunk muscles. He's just completing his rotation. So his pelvis went first, and that's the way it's supposed to happen. The lower trunk is supposed to rotate second, and you can see that's almost finished because his buttons, you can see, are almost square facing the catcher. And the third piece that comes is right where his school name is. And that level of rotation is bringing the arm, the pitching arm, into a squared up position. Now, 2 things are happening at this moment in this pitching motion. And one of the things, Ben, if you're listening, wow, I love that he has some glove arm left. A lot of pitchers at this point, their glove arm is already in, already dead. Sometimes it's in a weird place. But if you can see, picture what's going to happen next. He's going to continue rotating to be perfectly square with the catcher. Now, remember, he's not going to be stopping there, but he goes through that perfectly squared position. And to square up with velocity, he's going to pull that glove arm in even more. That's going to pull his right side around. See where the A is? That A is going to squeeze itself over to the left. And that rotation from the glove arm and those muscles under the school name are going to bring his arm into position. Because of the forces doing that, his elbow joint will take that forearm, which is almost at 90 degrees. And by the time he is squared up and ready to accelerate, his forearm will be at 90 degrees to his bicep. The ball will be directly in line. In other words, that forearm is going to be straight back towards that fence. He's going to probably have more external rotation. The ball's ready for delivery and he accelerates. So in terms of positioning, this is perfect. He has rotated. Now, here's what you want to look for. Number 1, so Joe, I want you to tell me as I say these things, because you're the voice of all the guys out there listening. So if you look at his left hip, and if he had jeans on, that pocket is right now facing the hitter. Okay? If you look at his arm, look from the shoulder of his pitching arm to the elbow. You'll notice the angle of that is behind his hip. In other words, his hip came forward before the arm. In baseball language, it's that your arm is lagging behind you. What's really happening is he's stretching all the muscles that are going to contract when he's ready to throw the ball. Now, in order to get that stretch, you have to have that stretch around the shoulder at this point, and it also has to be behind the hip. In other words, if when you turn in one piece, you're not going to have any stretching. If when you start to turn, you get your arm into this position right here, and right here, if your hip isn't all the way around, in other words, it did not lead the whole show, what will happen is his elbow will start to lead. He will start pointing the elbow forward the way a quarterback throws a football. He has no choice because his hip isn't around, so he's got to keep moving. And then you have a pitcher leading with the elbow. So in order to use the shoulder to accelerate the ball, which, guys, the shoulder is the big gun. It's the joint that rotates the fastest. You've got to use the shoulder, and you've got to stretch it before you use it. If you have a pitcher who looks like this, and as he squares up the top, he maintains that stretch in his shoulder as his upper body squares up, then he rotates it forward, then you're going to have a pitcher who's got proper mechanics. If his hip right now would be facing the corner, oh God, he's a lefty, so I can't even tell you which plate that is. So I guess it'd be third base, right, Joe?
Yes.
I'm never on a
Yes.
field. So, okay, so if his back leg wasn't turned all the way around and his back leg was on an angle, which is what happens, you get incomplete rotation, his lower body would not be positioning itself to accelerate. Well, he's not going to hold his arm back waiting for it. And in fact, if it's not already square, it means the pelvis didn't rotate efficiently. In other words, the back leg wasn't used correctly. Then his elbow is going to be forced to come forward. So what you have to have at this moment for everything to turn out okay, and his job isn't done. He's still got some things he's got to make sure and do. But at this point, he is completely set up for a perfect accelerating shoulder, elbow, wrist, ball velocity positioning. If your pitcher doesn't look like this, he cannot catch up in the middle of the motion. He's either going to lose not have all the velocity he could have because he didn't square up his pelvis, therefore didn't use his trunk. He's not going to have all the velocity because he has to lead with the elbow. He's going to probably have location problems because he'll be throwing a dart or pushing the ball. So at this is the defining moment. If a pitcher looks like this right here, he can convert that into something special. If he doesn't look like this right here, he's going to be, I'm not saying he's not going to throw a strike or he's not throwing hard, but he's not throwing efficiently, meaning using everything the way it was designed to be used. So far, Joe, does that make sense?
It does. It's funny. Before you started talking about it, I was looking at this and I was saying, a lot of other pictures of pitchers that I see, particularly at the major league level, who are at this point in their motion, they don't look like this. They look like they're off balance. They're leaning one way or the other. And the next thing I was thinking was, and I'll see the elbow starting to lead. Yeah. And then I was starting to think that, and then you just started talking about the leading with the elbow. So I think I've been listening to something over the last 5 years.
Yes. And actually this whole show's been a test for you, and I'm giving you an A+ to you. I've now gone to 6th grade. So
wonderful.
In my little pitching motion school. Now, I want to talk about two things because this is such a great photo to teach you coaches something. Number one, let's talk about the hip first, because remember I said, hey, the hip's got to be square. And then the second thing is we want the arm behind it. We don't want you rotating in one piece. Okay. The way that left hip, the way the left part of the pelvis turned towards the plate, because remember, he was sideways, went down the hill, and then he turned. It's through muscles that are on the pelvis, in the front, up at the top, and the use of his rear leg. Notice that his foot has turned completely over at this point because he used the ball of the foot to have pressure against the ground. Pressure, using the ground to stabilize so he could turn the leg. And that process is coming from mostly his hamstrings and some hip muscles. The foot has to be down to do that. He's got to lengthen out and keep the foot in contact with the ground long enough so it can turn the pelvis. By using that lower body connection to turn the pelvis, it creates that beginning of that stretch. Now, if this was Aroldis Chapman we're looking at and we weren't paying attention to his front leg, which is probably the only part of him I'm not crazy about, his arm, that shoulder to elbow, would be way back. In other words, you'd be seeing pulling like crazy. His hip would be one way and his shoulders the other way, way back. That's the difference in a guy who throws over 100. Now, Ben's doing a great job here. And see, what I love about this is now Ben can continue to improve because he's got efficient mechanics that can work for him. And now when you're doing it right, every time you do it, you get better at it because each muscle gets use, it gets loaded, it repairs, and it comes back to fight another fight for you. If you're doing it wrong, you do it differently every time. You don't get the conditioning, you don't get the training. So the first thing is the back leg, help him get his leg square. So I guarantee you, coaches, when you go out and look at some of your guys, you're going to see that hip, it never got square. And then you're going to see the next move is the arm's going to lead. The arm will be in front of the body. Now, the second thing is, here's where pitchers lose velocity. At this point, he's got to keep that arm in that exact same place, meaning if we had his shirt off and we went behind him, we would see that his left shoulder blade was in towards his spine. And anybody listening that can do this, just bring your blade in towards your spine. That's called scapular retraction. The pitchers that throw the hardest, they maintain scapular retraction for longer. There's muscles involved in this. I don't want to go into it, but you're really pre-stretching some other muscles. So when he turns now to square up, he pulls that glove arm in, and that's like turning the steering wheel just a little tiny bit more. We don't want his arm to start coming forward yet. And the best pitchers maintain that sort of stretched look across the front of the shoulder as they square up, and then boom, then they let it go. And that's the acceleration. So right here, defining moment, you got to look like this. But your next movement, please take advantage of this beautiful motion you just got into. Because if you start letting the arm go and it loosens up too soon, you're not ready to throw. Because remember, one of the things we talked about in the podcast, Joe, with the late arm,
right?
The ball has got to be ready to go forward when you are.
Right.
If you're square, if he was completely squared up, so picture him completely squared. Now we've got a straight line with the shoulders, but that ball was near his ear, just like it is now, because he doesn't have time to get it out like Ben does. He's got one movement left and that arm's going to be totally perfect. I already know it. But if he doesn't move that, he's going to have to then lead with the elbow because he needs one more movement to get the ball in line to accelerate. So, coaches, if you want to know how to use video and you want to know things to look at, defining moments, this is one thing to look at. Be prepared to see crazy stuff, but it will be at least a place for you to start putting your own knowledge with this and saying, oh, this is what's wrong with this guy. I knew something was wrong. Now, this is also why we want to have great lower body mechanics, because the ability for him to do this means that he stepped in the right place, he turned his body correctly, and you can't do that if you're all twisted up or you're doing something crazy. So anyway, I call this the defining moment of a pitcher's motion. If he gets here, he's set up for success. If he's not here, he's going to be compensating during delivery for whatever it was that he didn't do to have himself completely facing the target and do it through sequential rotation. So cool, huh? All from this picture Ben sent.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a excellent illustration and a great overview of everything. I mean, this is I often get the question from coaches and parents, can you just give me an example of somebody to watch or something that I can look at that is correct? And I can never find anything, not from a major league level. It's almost impossible because so many major league pitchers do things wrong and still are able to throw 95 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour in spite of themselves. It's because they're so athletic.
Yeah.
So it's hard. But now at least I have at least one picture that I can show them. So thank you.
Yes, and I don't go, and this is the thing, and this is my whole story with my career. I didn't go looking for baseball pitching. Pitching found me. I didn't go looking for this, but this came to me, and I said, wow, a teaching moment. How beautiful is this? Because there's so many cool things going on. Hey, and by the way, coaches, you always heard, I'm a glove arm fanatic. The ones who've been listening to me know this. Look at this guy's glove arm. He's still got something left. In fact, he's got as much left with his glove arm as he does with his pitching arm. This is a perfectly synchronized upper body rotation. His right arm's going to help his left side move faster into this delivery, into the acceleration. When you look at, in fact, I would get out there and maybe just have fun one day and say, let me see where pitchers' glove arms are when they're just completing their rotation. Talk about having an interesting afternoon. Oh, you'll see glove arms that are done before the pitcher even has started to turn.
Right.
And you'll know his glove arm isn't doing anything. Remember, everything has to be moving. You can't just stop one part and start another. And nothing starts in the middle of the motion. Whatever you do at the beginning, you're stuck with. So this photo here is stellar to teach what I taught today. And I'm so excited. And I can't tell you how much I respect Ben for the tenacity that he has shown throughout the years, because I cannot tell you the injuries that he had. There were many. And then he came to me and we just started rebuilding him. And you know that lefties always come with some extra funkiness on their own. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. But anyway, so that's my teaching moment for all you coaches, and keep the questions coming. If you have any questions about this, you can email me.
Yeah, that's great, Angel. So now we're going to move into our closing segment. And, you know, some people think that the new car smell is something that's a really fantastic smell. And then there are those of us who think that new baseball smell, that when you just pull a pearl out of the box and that smell. And so this year, our final segment will be called Pearls. And Angel, you can tell us what the pearls are all about.
Okay, so I want to talk about something really special today, and I want to start with why we're talking about this. So I found myself getting all mad again this last week, jumping completely Italian Sicilian over another pitcher coming to me who I worked with years ago, who was totally fine, and now he's completely messed up because he went somewhere or tried something where he was working with making his stride go really fast down the hill. And it was that same story, and we've talked about this before, where the stride, you do not take off out of the gate fast with that stride, because if you do, you're going to jar your landing, and the landing is everything. So I found myself getting upset about this. And then I said to myself, I've got to talk about this again. But then I thought, you know what? I got to talk about it in a different way. And what I realized is there isn't enough talk about the pitching motion and what each phase is designed for. And I think, just like, my gift and one of the specialties that I have is I break the pitching motion down into parts that are understandable. And the reason why this has been probably the highlight of my business, it's the way I had to learn it. I had to take scientific language, break it down to each motion. And in graduate school, whenever we look at any motion, we have to break it into phases and the purpose of that phase. And when people come up with gadgets, or you decide you're going to do something to help some part of your motion, like let me hook myself up to 15 tires on my back leg, and then make myself pull them real hard downhill. So when I take them off, I'm going to be running downhill. You have to understand that if what you're doing for that phase of the motion is something that's other than the intent of that motion, you're not going to be able to have an efficient motion. And when you not only disregard the intent of that phase, in other words, you make the stride phase the acceleration phase, you not only do something that isn't going to work, but because the rest of the body is still thinking pitching motion, it's going to get messed up too. So my complaint, and I think a lot of things that are out there that say we're going to increase your velocity, we're going to do this, and it's all about something that has to do with power and velocity. I mean, you very rarely hear something that says, this is a trick for better location. No, everybody wants let's go for power and velocity. I'm all for anything that helps a pitcher find that, but it has to be applied in the right place. So this thing about the stride, this thing about running and turning and jumping and doing all this and then throwing is completely not honoring the phases of the motion. So let me say this, and I've taught this before, but not in this way. When the pitcher is on balance, he lifts his knee and he heads down the hill. The purpose of that phase is to put his body in a position to be able to accelerate, with the first part of acceleration being to rotate. Now, if we go back to Ben's picture, you see that all his rotation is perfectly over his right leg. He's a lefty. So moving downhill positions the body so the acceleration phase can begin with all the body parts helping the pitcher to accelerate. Therefore, the movement downhill has to have an intensity in the head, meaning the pitcher knows, okay, here we go. But it has to be controlled in a way where his foot lands correctly, right to left correctly, how far out it lands correctly, because the acceleration phase is going to happen immediately following that landing. And the acceleration phase is go time. So all he's doing is getting himself in position for the acceleration phase, which is rotation into delivery, into ball release. And then you have your follow-through phase. So if you come up with gimmicks, or you come up, I've had so many pitchers who do the craziest thing when they lift their knee, the craziest thing with their arms, the craziest thing trying to get downhill. And guess what? If it's crazy, the rest of the motion, which is designed to have the power be imparted to the ball, is going to be off. And I don't care if the guy's throwing strikes, or I don't care if he's still throwing hard. If he's doing these things, he will, one, not be able to improve, two, probably have some phase where he gets worse, or three, he's going to hurt himself. So coaches, I love helping you make decisions. When someone comes to you and says, we're going to do this, or we can help your pitchers with this, or even when you read something and you go, this sounds interesting, because at first glance, most of these things do sound great. And listen, I want every pitcher to find his personal best with his velocity. But I want you to be able to evaluate if you're going to do more harm or if it's only going to give something temporary. Because when you throw off the timing of a pitcher, you're going to have problems. And the timing of the pitching motion goes along with what the purpose is. You prepare and position the body as you go downhill. Once you're positioned, meaning the front foot lands, you rotate really fast and throw the ball. If you are changing the intent of each phase, you're not going to be able to do the last phase. And remember, the faster you do anything, the more you're going to have to stop it before you can do the next thing. So you affect the transitions. And you know, the way I use this all the time, because we all drive and it's the simplest way. When you back out of the garage, you usually back out, you turn the car, the transition of that turning, you're backing out, turning. The minute you're all the way out, you put the car in drive and you smoothly take off. And usually when you see someone doing that, that's been doing it, not your 15-year-old son, but when you do it, the transitions are smooth. And at that moment, when you hit the gas, if you needed to go full power, you could. If you back out of the garage, straight back, doing 70 miles an hour, you're going to have to slam on the brakes. Then you're going to be jolted, and your turn is going to be not a smooth transition. And if that's not smooth, it's not going to be smooth to go in the direction that you have to go. So if we had a race going on with both those styles, which guy's going to be the better one? The one who knows when to apply the power, how to have the smooth transition, so he's available for the acceleration part of the movement. It's the same thing with pitching. And so I feel like there's just not enough talk about this. And some of these things that are designed to help, they even could work if they were more cognizant of some of these other characteristics that need to be present. so the pitcher can get downhill and position himself, his body correctly, so everything can happen during rotation. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, that was a great illustration with the car in the driveway. I like the way you put that together. The thing that I always think about is coaches who are really good hitting coaches. They just focus on each part of the swing from beginning to end. And you're always working on technique and working on how everything needs to be timed correctly for a perfect swing. And that's what we're all after. We're all after the perfect swing. And for some reason, when some coaches work with pitchers, that's not the way they do it. They come up with all these other crazy ways to get the velocity out. And you should just look at it the way you look at it when you coach your batters. You coach your batters for technique and timing, where we're not hitting medicine balls or anything, where you're just working on your technique. And I really would like to see some coaches take a look at their pitchers in the same way, just the same way you look at your batters. Just focus on technique, focus on efficiency, focus on timing. That's where you're going to get the best performance.
Well, I think that's such a great statement, and I like to say why I think there's such a disparity. And one of the reasons I got into this work is because I noticed right away pitchers were kind of being left to their own. They were doing it. I felt like this is back in the 90s. I'm like, why are they running distance? Why are they doing this? I'm like, it felt like, no, isn't anybody helping these guys? And here's the difference. And I say this all the time with the greatest respect. In baseball, you baseball guys who know everything. I mean, amazing things. You were playing baseball when someone like myself was sitting in school from a young age, being enthralled by the way the body moved and anatomy. And so much so that I, taught pitching to myself so that I could work with pitchers. I'm like the defense attorney for pitchers. And I think the reason why it's like this is hitting. While it's the hardest thing they say to do is to hit a fastball, a major league fastball, the body isn't moving as much. He's stepping out and swinging. So for somebody with great eye, great sense, knowing, it's an easier thing to become. And I've seen great hitting coaches. The head coach at the school that I'm at is a fantastic hitting coach. When I watch him work, it's amazing. It is a skill. And good hitting coaches, you're either good or you're not. There's no middle. People don't go back to you if you're not a good hitting coach. But with pitching, there's so many moving parts.
Right.
You're on one leg, then you're on two legs, and the arms are coming up, and they got to be at a certain place. And then the wrist has to do a certain thing. Plus, you got to have the pitches, and then you got to have your elbow this way. And because you're bringing guys to the mound who start at an early age, they have no sense of where their body is at in space. I mean, when you watch a teenager growing up, he's falling all over his feet as they get bigger, barely can walk around sometimes without tripping. And now these guys are up doing a motion that requires a ton of movement and a lot of moving parts. So it's not as easy for someone who doesn't have background to harness and change that, not into a pitching motion, but let's learn how to move first and to break the pitching motion down into movements. This is what I do. I mean, I don't teach a pitcher how to separate his hands. I don't use certain terms. It's like I teach him how to straighten his elbows. Then I teach him how to use his shoulders to raise the arms up. Before you know it, he's got a perfect handbrake, perfect separation and handbrake. Well, that's because I know what I'm doing. So I think coaches have shied away from getting too much involved in doing that kind of detail with pitchers. It is needed, and I'm hoping someday they have pitching motion coaches, just like they have pitching coaches. A pitching motion coach with the pitching coach's eyes can do wonders. And I know because I know what I do. And especially when I have input from a coach that says, hey, you know what? Could you look at him? I don't know what, but his curveball is like so bad. And there's something he's doing. I can't tell what it is, but I can tell he's doing something. And that's my job. So yes, Joe, you're absolutely right. What happens in hitting needs to start happening in pitching. It is a precision sport. Let's respect it, but let's first of all honor what each phase is about and make sure the pitcher understands the timing. The beginning gets him set. Party time is when the front foot lands, not when you lift your knee. So How'd you like that? Did I unwrap that pearl?
Oh, you did. That was that was a shiny, brilliant white pearl right there.
Well, I wanted to name this last segment this year because I worked with a lot of minor leaguers in the off season. So of course I went and bought a box of pearls. Oh my gosh. First of all, now I know why coaches make players chase the balls when they go out of the park. Man, they're expensive. But secondly, you should see the eyes of a pitcher, this big, tough guy, when you pull out of your bag a pearl that is not unwrapped and you hand it to him and say, here, have a good one today. Let's have a good outing. Here's the ball of the day. Their eyes get so big and they're so happy. It's like, and I said, man, for $17 a ball, I'm happy to put that smile on that kid's face today. So anyway, pearls and they were like, when are your new pearls arriving? When are they arriving? Because I started telling them, hey, you know what? I need to get these for all the guys. So anyway, but very special moment. And I hope the Pearl section of this show turns into being a special moment as well for everyone. I will be bringing topics that are near and dear to my heart and things that I have an opportunity to see that go on every day because I am in the trenches, trying to help you guys that are in the trenches as well. So anyway, great show today, Joe.
Yeah, awesome. Very good show. Way to kick off season 6. Thank you so much, Angel. And thank you, listener, for listening.
Yes, thank you.
As always, as we always close out, you can learn more about Angel and what she does at gymscience.com, gymscience.com. And today I am going to ask you to do 2 things, please, listener. Number 1, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. I hope you have, but if you haven't, please hit that button on your phone that says subscribe so that you can hear the next episode as soon as it comes out. And the other thing I'd like you to do is if you have a question for Angel, send her an email, or if you have an idea for a new show topic or something that we can maybe share with the other listeners, please send an email to angel@gymscience.com. We'll be back with episode 2 in a few weeks. And in the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.
Yes. Bye-bye, everyone.